Marcus Williams signed, "Good morning. How may I help you?" To the deaf visitor in the corporate lobby, his hands moving with practiced grace while other employees looked away in discomfort. The 23-year-old intern had no idea that CEO William Harrison was watching from the mezzanine above, his weathered hands gripping the railing as memories flooded back. Marcus couldn't have known that this simple act of kindness would change everything, not just for the confused visitor trying to navigate the maze of Pinnacle Enterprises, but for his own struggling life. He was just doing what felt right, unaware that the most powerful man in the building was about to discover something that would shake him to his core and set in motion a chain of events that would transform both their worlds forever. The previous evening, Marcus had sat hunched over his secondhand laptop in his cramped studio apartment, the blue glow illuminating stacks of overdue bills scattered across his makeshift desk. Rent, notice, final warning, past due. The red ink seemed to mock his dreams as he practiced sign language through online videos, his fingers moving silently through the darkness. His worn sneakers sat by the door, still damp from his shift at the all-night diner that ended just 4 hours before his internship began. The mattress on the floor bore witness to countless sleepless nights spent balancing equations of survival should he quit the unpaid internship at Pinnacle Enterprises to take full-time work. His younger sister's tuition weighed heavily on his mind, her acceptance letter to the state deaf school still pinned hopefully to his refrigerator. Marcus had learned sign language for her, spending years mastering every gesture and expression so she would never feel alone in their silent conversations. Now, as he trudged through another 18-hour day fueled by instant coffee and determination, he carried that same protective instinct into the gleaming corporate world that barely acknowledged his existence. The marble floors of Pinnacle Enterprises felt cold beneath his resoled shoes each morning, but Marcus walked them with quiet dignity, believing that somewhere in this tower of glass and ambition lay the future he was fighting so desperately to build. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The 60-story tower of Pinnacle Enterprises pierced the morning sky like a gleaming monument to ambition, its glass facade reflecting the first golden rays of dawn across the bustling city below. Marcus emerged from the subway station at precisely 6:30, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air as he joined the stream of suited professionals flowing toward the corporate fortress. His worn canvas sneakers whispered against the polished marble as he crossed the cavernous lobby, the sound swallowed by the symphony of clicking heels and leather soles that announced the arrival of those who belonged. The contrast was not lost on him, his carefully mended jacket moving among $1,000 suits, his second-hand briefcase clutched alongside designer bags that cost more than his monthly rent. Yet Marcus carried himself with an unshakable dignity that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper than his circumstances. His shoulders squared despite the weight of his struggles. He nodded respectfully to the security guards who had grown familiar with his early arrivals, receiving warm smiles in return from those who recognized dedication when they saw it. The elevator carried him to the 15th floor, where he began his ritual of preparation, organizing files with meticulous care, brewing fresh coffee for the executives who would arrive hours later, ensuring every document was perfectly aligned and every surface gleamed. Margaret Chen from accounting often paused to compliment his thoroughness, while James Rodriguez from marketing made a point of saying good morning each day, both recognizing something special in the young man who never complained despite receiving no compensation for his tireless efforts. Others swept past him as if he were invisible, their eyes focused on corner offices and quarterly reports, never noticing the quiet excellence with which Marcus approached even the most mundane tasks. He found genuine gratitude in small moments, the trust placed in him to handle important documents, the opportunity to learn from conversations he overheard, the slow building of professional relationships that might someday open doors. As the building filled with the energy of another corporate day, Marcus settled into his rhythm of service, unaware that his simple acts of kindness and professionalism were being observed by those who would soon change everything. Sarah Mitchell entered the towering lobby of Pinnacle Enterprises like a ship caught in unfamiliar waters, her designer heels clicking against the marble with determined precision, even as uncertainty flickered across her refined features. At 43, she possessed the kind of understated elegance that spoke of both professional success and personal strength, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a sophisticated chignon that framed intelligent hazel eyes now clouded with mounting frustration. The massive lobby stretched before her like a canyon of glass and steel, its soaring ceiling and gleaming surfaces designed to intimidate as much as impress, and she found herself momentarily overwhelmed by the maze of corridors and the sea of purposeful strangers flowing around her. She approached the main reception desk with the confident stride of someone accustomed to boardrooms and high-stakes meetings, but her expression quickly shifted as she attempted to communicate her needs through gestures and written notes that the bewildered receptionist struggled to interpret. The young woman behind the marble counter smiled apologetically, speaking slowly and loudly as if volume might bridge the communication gap, her discomfort growing more apparent with each failed exchange. A security guard noticed the commotion and approached with well-meaning intentions, his hand gestures clumsy and ineffective as he pointed in various directions while speaking words that fell into the silence surrounding Sarah like stones into a deep well. Other employees began to take notice of the scene unfolding near the reception area, their curious glances quickly transforming into averted eyes and hurried steps as they recognized a situation they felt ill-equipped to handle. The bustling energy of the lobby seemed to create an invisible circle around Sarah, as if her communication barrier had erected walls that others were reluctant to cross, leaving her increasingly isolated in the center of the corporate storm. The awkwardness grew palpable as more staff members became aware of the situation but chose to pretend they hadn't noticed, their conversations growing artificially animated as they passed by with studied indifference. From across the lobby, Marcus felt his chest tighten as he witnessed the scene unfolding, the familiar ache of recognition washing over him as he saw the frustration and disappointment creeping across Sarah's face. Without hesitation, he abandoned the stack of documents he'd been organizing and crossed the marble expanse with purposeful strides, his worn sneakers silent against the polished stone, as he approached with the quiet confidence of someone who understood exactly what was needed. "Good morning." His hands moved with fluid grace as he positioned himself where Sarah could see him clearly, his fingers forming the familiar signs that had become second nature through years of practice. "How may I help you?" Sarah's face transformed instantly, the tension melting away like snow in spring sunshine as she realized she had found someone who could bridge the communication gap that had left her stranded. Her own hands moved with elegant precision as she responded, explaining her appointment and her difficulty navigating the building's complex layout. Her relief so profound it seemed to illuminate her entire being. Around them, the lobby's energy shifted as other employees slowed their pace to witness this unexpected exchange, their expressions ranging from curiosity to genuine amazement as they watched Marcus communicate with a fluency that spoke of dedication far beyond casual learning. Marcus approached Sarah with the gentle urgency of someone who recognized pain and felt compelled to ease it, his worn sneakers carrying him across the marble expanse with quiet determination as conversations around them began to fade into curious whispers. His hands rose with fluid grace, fingers moving through the familiar shapes that had become as natural as breathing, forming the signs that asked, "Good morning. How may I help you?" with such genuine warmth that the question seemed to glow in the space between them. Sarah's transformation was instantaneous and profound, her shoulders releasing tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying as her face bloomed with the kind of relief that comes only after wandering lost in a foreign land and suddenly hearing your native tongue. Her own hands responded with elegant precision, explaining that she had an important meeting but couldn't find the correct floor, her movements flowing with the graceful confidence of someone finally able to communicate without barriers or misunderstandings. Marcus nodded with understanding, his expression radiating the kind of patient kindness that made others feel immediately at ease, and he began explaining the building's layout through signs that painted pictures in the air between them. Around the lobby, the usual morning rush began to slow as employees found themselves drawn to this unexpected scene, their briefcases and coffee cups forgotten as they watched two people communicate through a language of movement and expression that seemed almost musical in its rhythm. The security guard who had struggled earlier stood transfixed, his earlier frustration replaced by admiration for the young intern's effortless fluency, while the receptionist leaned forward across her marble counter to better observe the graceful conversation unfolding before her. Executives who normally swept through the lobby without acknowledging anyone below their pay grade found themselves pausing mid-stride, captivated by Marcus's natural ability to bridge what had seemed an impossible gap. His signs were not merely functional but carried emotional nuance, small gestures of reassurance and warmth that transformed what could have been a simple exchange of information into something approaching poetry. Sarah's gratitude radiated from every movement, her responses growing more animated as she realized she had found not just someone who could understand her words, but someone who approached their interaction with genuine care and respect. The lobby's atmosphere shifted palpably. As witnesses to this scene began to understand, they were observing something rare and beautiful. A moment where human connection transcended the barriers that so often divide us, leaving everyone present somehow elevated by the simple act of watching kindness in motion. 60 floors above the marble lobby, CEO William Harrison stood frozen at the mezzanine railing, his weathered hands gripping the polished brass with such intensity that his knuckles had turned white as winter bone. At 58, he had built an empire through calculated decisions and steely resolve, his silver hair and tailored suits commanding respect in boardrooms across 3 continents. But now he found himself utterly unprepared for the emotional avalanche triggered by the graceful conversation unfolding in the lobby below. The sight of Marcus's hands moving through familiar patterns sent tremors through William's carefully constructed walls, each sign unlocking memories that had been buried beneath decades of corporate success and deliberate forgetting. His breathing grew shallow as he watched the young intern's fluid gestures, the movements so achingly familiar that they seemed to tear open wounds he thought had long since healed. Suddenly, he was 8 years old again, sitting cross-legged on a hospital bed beside his younger brother David, their hands dancing through secret conversations that no one else could understand, creating a world of silent laughter and shared dreams that existed beyond the reach of doctors and their grim prognoses. The memory of David's smile, bright and defiant even as his small body fought battles too large for someone so young, crashed over William like a tide he had spent 30 years trying to hold back. His assistant, Patricia Hernandez, approached with the quarterly reports he had requested, but stopped short when she noticed the tension radiating from his usually composed frame. "Mr. Harrison, are you all right?" she asked, her voice carefully modulated with the professional concern of someone who had worked beside him for 15 years and had never seen him display such raw emotion. William's eyes remained fixed on the scene below, watching as Marcus guided the visitor with patient kindness, and he felt something fundamental shifting in his chest, a recognition that pierced through all his accumulated armor. "That intern," he whispered, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "The young man helping the woman downstairs. I need to know everything about him. His background, his education, how long he's been here, why he knows sign language." Patricia followed his gaze, quickly spotting Marcus in his worn jacket among the sea of expensive suits, and made careful notes while wondering what had so profoundly affected the man who was known throughout the corporate world for his unshakable composure. "Right away, sir," she replied, sensing that something momentous was beginning to unfold. Though she could never have imagined how completely this single moment would transform everything her boss thought he knew about success, purpose, and the echoes of love that time can never truly silence. Marcus gestured toward the bank of elevators with a welcoming smile, his movements conveying not just direction but genuine hospitality as he signed, "Please, allow me to show you the way." His natural grace transforming what could have been a simple escort into something approaching a guided tour through a world suddenly made accessible. As they walked together across the vast lobby, their conversation flowed with the easy rhythm of two people who understood that communication was about far more than words. Sarah's hands moving with elegant precision as she explained that she was here for a crucial meeting with the executive marketing team about implementing comprehensive accessibility standards across major corporations. Marcus nodded with understanding, his responses revealing a depth of knowledge about accessibility issues that surprised even Sarah, who had spent decades advocating for inclusive design and equal access in corporate environments. "You work here as an intern?" she asked through graceful gestures, her expression mixing admiration with curiosity as she took in his worn clothing against the backdrop of marble and gold that surrounded them. Marcus confirmed with humble pride, explaining that he was learning the business world while contributing whatever he could, his signs carrying the quiet dignity of someone who understood the value of opportunity regardless of compensation. Around them, the morning rush had evolved into something resembling a respectful audience, employees who had initially averted their eyes, now watching with genuine fascination as they witnessed Marcus navigate complex topics through sign language with the fluency of a native speaker. Margaret Chen from accounting paused near the elevator bank, her usual hurried pace forgotten as she observed the young intern she had always admired, demonstrating skills she never knew he possessed, while James Rodriguez found himself genuinely moved by the patient kindness Marcus showed in ensuring Sarah felt completely welcome and understood. As they reached the 23rd floor, Marcus took care to explain the layout of the executive level, his hands painting pictures of conference rooms and office locations, while his expression radiated the kind of warmth that made Sarah feel as though she had found a trusted friend rather than merely a helpful guide. Other employees emerging from nearby offices caught glimpses of their interaction, and something in Marcus's natural compassion and professional competence began to shift perceptions throughout the floor, creating ripples of respect that would soon reach corners of the building where his name had never been spoken. Sarah found herself not just grateful for his assistance, but genuinely impressed by his knowledge and insight, recognizing in this young man qualities that many seasoned professionals never develop, a combination of empathy and intelligence that suggested extraordinary potential waiting to be discovered. The marketing department's conference room buzzed with nervous energy as department head Jennifer Walsh shuffled through presentations, while her team exchanged uncertain glances, their carefully prepared materials suddenly feeling inadequate in the face of a communication barrier they hadn't anticipated when scheduling this crucial meeting with the renowned accessibility consultant, Sarah Mitchell. The polished mahogany table reflected the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, but the atmosphere grew increasingly tense as Jennifer realized their interpreter had called in sick at the last minute, leaving them scrambling to find alternative solutions for what could be a multi-million-dollar consulting contract. Marcus had intended to simply escort Sarah to the conference room and return to his filing duties, but as he witnessed the mounting panic among the marketing staff and saw Sarah's patient but concerned expression, he found himself stepping forward with quiet determination, despite knowing he was venturing far beyond his prescribed role as an unpaid intern. "I could interpret for the meeting," he signed to Sarah before turning to address Jennifer Walsh directly, his voice carrying the calm confidence of someone who understood both the importance of the moment and his own capabilities. Jennifer's initial surprise at the suggestion from a young intern quickly transformed into desperate gratitude as she realized this unexpected solution might salvage what had seemed like a doomed presentation, and she nodded her approval while the rest of the team watched with mixture of curiosity and skepticism. As the meeting commenced, Marcus positioned himself where both Sarah and the marketing team could see him clearly, his hands moving with remarkable fluency as he translated complex business concepts, technical terminology, and nuanced strategic discussions with the precision of a seasoned professional interpreter. The room's energy shifted dramatically as everyone present began to understand they were witnessing something extraordinary, Marcus seamlessly conveying not just words, but the emotional undertones and subtle implications that made communication truly effective, his natural intelligence allowing him to grasp sophisticated marketing strategies and translate them with accuracy that impressed even Sarah, who had worked with countless interpreters throughout her career. Jennifer Walsh found herself forgetting that Marcus was an intern as she watched him handle complex discussions about federal compliance standards, accessibility audits, and implementation timelines with the kind of professional competence that typically took years to develop, while her team members exchanged glances of growing respect for the young man they had barely noticed before this moment. Sarah's gratitude radiated through every gesture as she realized that Marcus wasn't simply translating words, but was actively facilitating understanding between two worlds, his genuine care for effective communication, transforming what could have been a stilted business exchange into a flowing conversation that allowed her expertise to shine through every carefully interpreted phrase. William Harrison sat behind his imposing mahogany desk as Patricia placed a manila folder before him, with the efficiency that had made her indispensable over 15 years of service, but his usual composure cracked as he opened the file and began reading about Marcus Williams, each revelation hitting him like waves against a crumbling seawall. The young man's academic record painted a picture of extraordinary resilience. Dean's List honors at the community college, where he'd earned his associate degree while working 3 part-time jobs, followed by a scholarship to the state university, where he'd maintained a remarkable grade point average, despite the crushing weight of financial hardship that forced him to stretch his bachelor's degree across 6 years instead of 4. William's hands trembled slightly as he read about Marcus's family circumstances: his mother's early death from cancer when he was 16, his father's subsequent departure that left Marcus as the sole guardian for his younger sister Emma, who had been born profoundly deaf and required specialized care that insurance barely covered. The file revealed that Marcus had taught himself sign language through library books and online videos, driven by a fierce determination to ensure his sister never felt isolated or misunderstood, spending countless hours practicing until he achieved the fluency that had so moved William from his perch above the lobby. As he read about Marcus's current living situation, the studio apartment in a neighborhood where sirens wailed through the night, the stack of overdue bills that Patricia's discreet inquiry had uncovered, William felt something fundamental shifting in his chest. A recognition that went beyond mere sympathy into the realm of profound understanding. Here was a young man who had sacrificed his own comfort and opportunities to care for someone he loved, who had learned an entire language not for career advancement but out of pure devotion, who faced each day with dignity despite circumstances that would have broken lesser spirits. The parallels to his own childhood with David became impossible to ignore. The memory of their secret conversations and shared dreams, now illuminated by the recognition that Marcus was living the kind of love that William had once known but had somehow lost in his climb toward corporate success. Patricia noticed the CEO's unusual stillness as he stared at the documents spread before him, his silver hair catching the afternoon light as he absorbed information that seemed to transform his understanding of the young intern who had unknowingly opened a door to William's carefully buried past. "Schedule a meeting with Mr. Williams," William finally said, his voice carrying an emotion that Patricia had never heard before, thick with purpose and possibility. "But don't tell him what it's about. Just say I'd like to speak with him personally." As Patricia made notes and prepared to leave, William remained motionless at his desk, the file still open before him, his mind racing with plans that would honor both the memory of a brother he had lost and the extraordinary character of a young man who deserved so much more than the world had given him. Patricia Hernandez had worked alongside William Harrison for 15 years, navigating corporate storms and celebrating triumphs, while maintaining the delicate balance between professional discretion and genuine concern, but his behavior over the past week had left her feeling as though she was watching a stranger inhabit her familiar boss's expensive suits. The man who typically scheduled every minute with military precision now found himself staring out windows for long stretches, his usual rapid-fire decision-making replaced by contemplative silences that seemed to echo with unspoken thoughts, while his requests grew increasingly unusual and seemingly unconnected to quarterly reports or merger negotiations. "Patricia, I need you to pull all our current accessibility policies," he had said on Tuesday, his voice carrying an urgency that seemed disproportionate to what she assumed was routine compliance review, followed by Wednesday's request for a comprehensive analysis of the company's hiring practices and internship programs. His phone calls had become exercises in mystery, hushed conversations behind closed doors, where she caught only fragments through the heavy oak. Phrases like legal implications and company restructuring and immediate implementation that suggested major changes brewing beneath the surface of his carefully maintained executive facade. The corporate grapevine, always sensitive to shifts in executive behavior, began crackling with speculation as word spread through break rooms and elevator conversations that the CEO had personally requested files on a low-level intern, an unprecedented breach of the hierarchical protocols that typically governed interactions between the executive suite and entry-level employees. Jennifer Walsh from marketing had mentioned William's surprise appearance outside the conference room where Marcus had interpreted Sarah's meeting. His presence, inexplicable since accessibility consulting had never previously captured his attention, while security personnel reported unusual requests for building access records and surveillance footage from the lobby area. The mystery deepened when Patricia discovered William had canceled his traditional monthly lunch with the board chairman to spend time researching federal disability employment laws, his browser history revealing late-night searches for topics that seemed entirely removed from Pinnacle Enterprises' core business interests. Department heads began comparing notes in hushed conversations, their confusion growing as they tried to connect the dots between their CEO's sudden interest in an intern who wore secondhand clothes and rode public transportation, a young man whose name had never before crossed their radar despite his obvious competence and dedication. Even the executive assistants network, typically privy to corporate secrets through carefully overheard conversations, found themselves baffled by William's transformation from predictable business machine into someone driven by motivations that seemed to reach far beyond profit margins and market positioning, leaving the entire 47th floor buzzing with questions that no one dared ask directly, but everyone desperately wanted answered. Marcus stood frozen in the narrow hallway of his apartment building, the eviction notice trembling in his hands like a death sentence written on crisp white letterhead, the bold red letters declaring "Final Notice" seeming to burn through his fingers and straight into his chest, where hope had been quietly growing throughout his weeks at Pinnacle Enterprises. The fluorescent light overhead flickered with dying gasps that matched his own shallow breathing as he read the impossible numbers, the accumulated debt that no amount of coffee shop wages or late-night delivery driving could possibly cover within the 14 days demanded by his landlord's ultimatum. His phone buzzed with a text message from Emma, his 17-year-old sister whose bright smile had been his anchor through every storm, her words simultaneously filling him with pride and breaking his heart as she shared news of her acceptance into the prestigious residential program for deaf students, the opportunity of a lifetime that came with a price tag that might as well have been written in gold. Marcus sank onto the single chair in his studio apartment, surrounded by the physical evidence of his struggle. Unpaid bills creating paper mountains on every surface, while his sister's dreams hung in the balance, and he felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on his shoulders like a boulder threatening to crush everything he had worked toward. The internship at Pinnacle Enterprises had felt like a doorway to a different future, each day building knowledge and connections that could transform his life. But doorways meant nothing if you were homeless, and dreams couldn't pay for Emma's education or put food on a table that existed only in his imagination. He pulled out his phone and stared at the contact information for the warehouse supervisor who had offered him full-time work-loading trucks, decent money that would solve his immediate crisis, but would require him to abandon the corporate world where he had begun to believe he might actually belong. The night stretched endlessly before him as he paced the small space between his mattress and the kitchenette, his mind cycling through calculations that never added up to anything but heartbreak, weighing the certainty of survival against the possibility of a future that seemed increasingly like a luxury he couldn't afford. Through his single window, the city sparkled with lights that belonged to people who had never faced such choices, who had never been forced to choose between feeding their family and chasing their dreams, while Marcus sat in darkness because he had disconnected the electricity 2 weeks ago, his phone providing the only illumination for a decision that felt like choosing which part of himself to kill. Sarah Mitchell's reputation in the world of corporate accessibility consulting carried the kind of weight that could reshape entire industries with a single recommendation: Her name whispered with reverence in boardrooms across the nation, where executives understood that her approval could unlock federal contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, while her disapproval could trigger investigations that destroyed careers and shuttered departments overnight. For 20 years, she had served as the bridge between the federal government's increasingly stringent accessibility requirements and corporations desperate to prove their commitment to inclusive practices, her reports carrying the power to determine which companies would receive lucrative government contracts and which would find themselves blacklisted from opportunities that could sustain entire business ecosystems. The Department of Health and Human Services had commissioned her current evaluation tour specifically to identify corporate leaders in accessibility implementation, companies that could serve as models for the new federal standards being rolled out across all government partnerships, and Pinnacle Enterprises had been selected for review based purely on their market position rather than any demonstrated commitment to inclusive practices. Sarah's leather portfolio contained evaluation forms that would determine whether William Harrison's company joined the elite circle of government-approved contractors or remained relegated to the increasingly narrow margins of private sector work. But as she sat in her hotel room that evening, her pen hovered over assessment categories that suddenly seemed inadequate to capture what she had experienced in the marble lobby of the corporate tower. She had visited 43 companies in 6 months, encountering the full spectrum of corporate attitudes toward accessibility, from grudging compliance masked as enthusiasm to genuine commitment undermined by incompetent execution. But never had she witnessed the kind of natural, instinctive inclusion that Marcus had demonstrated without prompting, training, or awareness that he was being evaluated. Her preliminary notes glowed with superlatives that she rarely used, phrases like exceptional cultural integration and organic accessibility mindset, filling pages that typically contained clinical observations about policy implementation and structural modifications, because Marcus's simple act of human kindness had revealed something about Pinnacle Enterprises that no corporate presentation or guided tour could have demonstrated. The young intern's fluent sign language, his patient guidance, and his genuine care for her comfort had created exactly the kind of environment that federal accessibility standards were designed to foster, and Sarah found herself crafting a report that would position Pinnacle Enterprises as a flagship example of inclusive corporate culture, unknowingly transforming Marcus's moment of compassion into a catalyst for opportunities that would reshape the entire company's future. The memories crashed over William like a dam bursting after decades of careful containment, carrying him back to the small bedroom he had shared with his younger brother David in their modest Cleveland home, where two boys had created an entire world through dancing fingers and silent laughter that existed beyond the reach of doctors who spoke in grim whispers about genetic hearing loss and shortened life expectancy. David had been born deaf into a family that barely understood the word, but William, only 3 years older, had appointed himself as translator, protector, learning sign language with the fierce determination of a child who refused to let anything separate him from his best friend. Their mother would find them hours past bedtime, flashlight illuminating their secret conversations under shared blankets, William's hands moving through stories of dragons and adventures, while David's eyes sparkled with joy that made his physical frailty seem insignificant compared to the brightness of his spirit. They had been inseparable through David's countless hospital stays, William sneaking into pediatric wards to sit beside machines that beeped and hummed, while his brother fought battles that should never have belonged to someone so young, their silent conversations providing refuge from the clinical coldness that surrounded David's deteriorating condition. When David died at age 14, his heart finally surrendering to the genetic defects that had made every day a gift, William felt as though half of his soul had been ripped away, leaving him floating in a world where sign language became a painful reminder of loss rather than a bridge to connection. The years that followed blurred together in William's memory. College scholarships earned through academic excellence that felt hollow without David to share his achievements, then graduate school and the relentless climb up corporate ladders that seemed to carry him further from everything his brother had represented. Success had wrapped around him like expensive armor, each promotion and acquisition creating distance from the boy who had once spent hours practicing signs in front of bathroom mirrors, ensuring he could keep up with David's quick wit and boundless imagination, until sign language became a skill buried so deeply beneath layers of corporate achievement that he had almost convinced himself it belonged to someone else entirely. The guilt had accumulated like compound interest over 30 years, growing heavier with each deaf person he encountered and chose to ignore. Each moment when he could have used his influence to advocate for accessibility, but instead focused on profit margins and market share, betraying everything David had taught him about the beauty of inclusion and the power of human connection that transcended the limitations others imposed. William Harrison sat in his executive office as the city lights began to twinkle 40 floors below, the weight of decisions settling over him like a mantle he had been avoiding for 30 years, while Marcus's personnel file lay spread across his mahogany desk like pieces of a puzzle that revealed not just a struggling young man, but a mirror of everything he had once believed about honor, sacrifice, and the true meaning of success. The numbers told only part of Marcus's story: the academic achievements earned while working multiple jobs, the perfect attendance record despite having no reliable transportation, the letters of recommendation that painted a picture of someone whose character exceeded his circumstances by measures that couldn't be quantified on any corporate spreadsheet. William found himself reading between the lines of dry bureaucratic language, seeing the 18-hour days, the meals skipped to pay for his sister's school supplies, the quiet dignity with which Marcus faced each morning, despite obstacles that would have crushed most people before they reached their 20th birthday, and he recognized in this young man the kind of integrity that he had once possessed before success had taught him to value profit over principle. The challenge now lay not in deciding whether to help, but in determining how to extend that help without destroying the very pride and independence that made Marcus worthy of assistance, because William understood that young men like Marcus didn't want charity. They wanted opportunity, and the difference between those two concepts could determine whether his intervention became a blessing or a source of shame that would poison everything it touched. He had spent the afternoon researching corporate precedents for rapid advancement, studying legal frameworks for creating new positions, and consulting with human resources about compensation structures that would appear merit-based rather than arbitrary, because every aspect of his plan needed to honor Marcus's dignity while providing the financial security that would allow him to pursue his potential without the crushing burden of survival. The irony was not lost on William that he was planning to use the very corporate machinery he had mastered in pursuit of wealth to now serve a purpose that David would have understood immediately: the creation of genuine opportunity for someone whose circumstances had nothing to do with his character and everything to do with the randomness of birth and economic inequality. As he drafted preliminary plans for a new accessibility division within Pinnacle Enterprises, complete with competitive salary structures and clear advancement pathways, William felt something awakening in his chest that he hadn't experienced since those childhood days when helping his brother navigate a world designed without him had felt like the most important work in the universe. And he realized that perhaps the greatest gift Marcus could give him was the chance to remember who he had been before success had made him forget the difference between having money and having meaning. Marcus felt his heart stop when Patricia Hernandez appeared at his small desk in the filing room, her professional smile doing nothing to calm the terror that immediately flooded his system, as she delivered the words that seemed to echo from his worst nightmares. "Mr. Williams, Mr. Harrison would like to see you in his office immediately." The 20-minute elevator ride to the 47th floor felt like ascending toward his own execution, each floor number illuminating above the polished brass buttons, marking another step closer to what he was certain would be the end of his internship and possibly his future, his mind racing through every possible mistake he might have made during his weeks at Pinnacle Enterprises. His reflection in the mirrored elevator walls showed a young man whose worn jacket and secondhand tie suddenly seemed like glaring evidence of his unworthiness to occupy the same space as the most powerful executives in the building, while his hands trembled with the kind of fear that comes from having everything to lose and no safety net to catch him if he fell. The executive floor stretched before him like a corridor designed by architects who understood that power should feel intimidating, its thick carpets and original artwork serving as silent reminders that he was entering a world where his monthly rent wouldn't cover a single piece of furniture, where decisions were made that affected thousands of lives without the decision-makers ever considering the human cost of their choices. Patricia led him through this corporate sanctuary with the practiced grace of someone who belonged among such opulence, her heels whispering against marble that reflected the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of a city Marcus had never seen from such heights. When she paused outside the imposing oak doors that bore William Harrison's nameplate in gold lettering, Marcus felt his breathing become shallow and rapid, his mind conjuring images of security guards escorting him from the building, while his dreams of a better future crumbled like sandcastles before an inevitable tide. The office that greeted him defied every expectation his fear had constructed, its warm lighting and comfortable furniture creating an atmosphere more reminiscent of a private library than a corporate command center, while William Harrison himself rose from behind his desk with a gentle smile that immediately began to dissolve the ice that had formed in Marcus's chest. "Please, Marcus, have a seat," William said, his voice carrying none of the stern authority that Marcus had anticipated, but instead offering the kind of warmth typically reserved for welcomed guests rather than employees. Facing termination, and as he gestured toward a leather chair positioned to catch the golden light filtering through tall windows, Marcus began to wonder if perhaps this meeting might not be the disaster his imagination had painted. William leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped together, as if holding onto something precious and fragile, his silver hair catching the afternoon light, while his eyes carried the weight of memories that had been buried for far too long. And when he spoke, his voice emerged thick with emotion that seemed to surprise him as much as it did Marcus. "I saw you with the deaf visitor in the lobby last week," he began, watching as Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to recognition. "The way you helped her, your sign language, the kindness you showed without hesitation or expectation of recognition, and I need you to understand that watching you in that moment changed something fundamental in me that I thought was lost forever." Marcus sat perfectly still, his mind struggling to process the impossibility of the CEO having witnessed what he considered simply the right thing to do. While William's voice continued with increasing vulnerability, each word seeming to cost him something as he peeled away layers of corporate armor that had protected him for decades. "I had a younger brother named David who was born deaf, and for 14 years we were inseparable, communicating through sign language that became as natural as breathing until he died, and I somehow convinced myself that the best way to honor his memory was to bury everything that reminded me of him, including the language that had connected us and the community that had embraced us both." William's hands began to move almost unconsciously, fingers forming signs that emerged from muscle memory deeper than conscious thought, and Marcus felt his breath catch as he recognized the gestures that spelled out brother and love and forgiveness in the space between them. "Watching you with that woman, seeing your fluency and compassion, made me realize that I've spent 30 years running from the most important lesson David ever taught me, that true success isn't measured in profit margins, but in our willingness to build bridges for people who need them most," William continued, his voice breaking slightly as tears gathered in eyes that had remained dry through countless boardroom battles and corporate victories. Marcus felt his own eyes filling as he signed, "I'm sorry for your loss," with hands that trembled with the weight of understanding, recognizing in this powerful man's vulnerability the same protective love that had driven him to learn sign language for Emma, the same fierce devotion that made losing someone feel like losing half of yourself. In that moment, surrounded by the trappings of corporate success, but connected by something far more valuable, two men from completely different worlds discovered they shared the most important thing of all: the knowledge that love sometimes requires learning an entire language just to say "you matter" to someone who needs to hear it. William rose from his chair and moved to the window where the city sprawled beneath them like a glittering testament to ambition and possibility, his hands clasped behind his back as he gathered the courage to make an offer that would honor both his brother's memory and Marcus's extraordinary character. While the young man sat frozen in leather, that probably cost more than his monthly rent, still struggling to process the impossible vulnerability that had just been shared in this sanctuary of corporate power. "Marcus, I want to create a new division within Pinnacle Enterprises, a comprehensive accessibility initiative that will transform how we approach inclusion, not just as a compliance requirement, but as a fundamental expression of our values," William began, his voice growing stronger as purpose replaced vulnerability. "And I want you to head that division, with a starting salary of $120,000 annually, full benefits, and the authority to build a team that will make this company a leader in corporate accessibility." The numbers hit Marcus like physical blows, each digit seeming to rearrange the basic mathematics of his existence, transforming him from someone who counted every dollar to someone who could breathe without constantly calculating the cost of survival, while his mind struggled to accept that such transformation could emerge from a single conversation in an office that felt more like a dream than reality. "I don't understand," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible as he struggled against the certainty that this was some elaborate mistake, that someone would soon realize they were talking to a broke intern rather than someone worthy of such impossible generosity. "Why me? Why this? I'm nobody special. I just did what anyone should do." William turned from the window with eyes that reflected decades of regret transformed into purpose, his expression carrying the weight of someone who had finally found a way to make amends with a past that had haunted him through every success that felt hollow without meaning. And when he spoke, his words carried the authority of absolute conviction. "You're wrong, Marcus. You are everything special. You represent exactly the kind of leadership this company needs, someone who understands that accessibility isn't about charity or compliance, but about recognizing the fundamental dignity and potential of every human being," William said, extending his hand across the space between them, while Marcus sat transfixed by the impossibility of dreams materializing in real time. Through tears that blurred his vision and made the golden afternoon light dance like stars, Marcus reached out to accept not just a handshake, but a future that would transform everything, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Yes," with all the gratitude that a human heart could contain. While somewhere in the space between them, the spirit of a deaf boy named David smiled at the bridge that had finally been built in his honor. The news of Marcus Williams's promotion from unpaid intern to director of accessibility initiatives spread through Pinnacle Enterprises like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, creating waves of conversation that reached every corner of the 47-story tower, and fundamentally altered the social dynamics that had governed corporate interactions for decades. Within hours of the official announcement, employees who had barely acknowledged Marcus's existence found themselves re-examining their own assumptions about worth and potential, while those like Margaret Chen and James Rodriguez, who had recognized his character from the beginning, felt a surge of vindication that someone of genuine merit had finally been elevated to a position where his talents could flourish. The transformation began almost immediately as Marcus established his new office on the 28th floor, a space that quickly became a symbol of possibility, where the young man who had once organized files in a cramped basement room now commanded resources and authority that would reshape the company's entire approach to inclusion, accessibility. His first initiative involved mandatory sign language training for all customer-facing employees, a program that initially met with resistance from executives who viewed it as unnecessary expense until the first week's enrollment exceeded capacity by 300%, revealing a hunger for meaningful skill development that surprised even Marcus with its intensity. The cafeteria buzzed with employees practicing basic signs during lunch breaks, their conversations peppered with finger-spelled words and gestures that created an atmosphere of shared learning and mutual support, while security guards who had once nodded politely to Marcus now approached him with eager questions about deaf culture and communication techniques. Jennifer Walsh from marketing became one of his strongest advocates, transforming her department's approach to advertising and outreach by incorporating accessibility considerations into every campaign, while her team discovered that designing for inclusion actually enhanced creativity rather than limiting it. leading to award-winning campaigns that resonated with broader audiences than anyone had anticipated. The company's lobby, where Marcus had first demonstrated his compassion, became a showcase for universal design principles, with visual announcement systems, tactile guidance paths, and multilingual signage that welcomed visitors of all abilities, while the reception staff completed intensive training that made every guest feel valued and understood, regardless of their communication needs. Perhaps most remarkably, the cultural shift extended beyond mere policy implementation into the realm of fundamental corporate values, as employees throughout the organization began to embrace the principle that true excellence required consideration of every person's needs and potential, transforming Pinnacle Enterprises from a company that happened to employ disabled individuals into an organization that actively celebrated the diverse perspectives and capabilities that inclusion brought to every aspect of their work. 6 months after that life-changing conversation in William's office, Marcus stood in his spacious corner office on the 28th floor, sunlight streaming through windows that offered panoramic views of the city where his sister Emma now attended the prestigious Riverside Academy for the Deaf, her tuition fully covered by his new salary that had transformed their lives from a daily struggle for survival into a future bright with possibilities and dreams finally within reach. The framed photo on his desk showed Emma's radiant smile on her first day at the academy, surrounded by classmates who shared her language and understood her world, while another picture captured the moment he had handed his landlord the final rent payment, along with enough money to cover the security deposits for the comfortable 2-bedroom apartment where Emma now had her own room filled with books and art supplies rather than sleeping on a fold-out couch in a studio barely large enough for one person. His team had grown to 12 full-time employees, brilliant minds drawn from universities and advocacy organizations who brought expertise in assistive technology, universal design, and disability rights law, their collaborative energy-filling conference rooms where innovative solutions emerged daily to challenges that had once seemed insurmountable to corporations struggling with accessibility compliance. Sarah Mitchell's report had exceeded even William's most optimistic expectations, her glowing assessment of Pinnacle Enterprises' accessibility initiatives landing them 3 major federal contracts worth a combined $800 million, while her detailed documentation of the company's cultural transformation had prompted the Department of Health and Human Services to designate them as a model program for other corporations seeking to implement meaningful inclusion practices. The ripple effects extended far beyond financial success, as other major corporations began recruiting Pinnacle's accessibility team members and requesting consultations from Marcus, whose reputation as an innovative leader had spread throughout the business community faster than anyone could have predicted. Meanwhile, William Harrison had undergone his own profound transformation, volunteering twice weekly at the local deaf community center where he taught business skills to young adults while relearning the sign language that had once connected him to his beloved brother David, his corporate suits replaced by casual clothes, as he sat in circles with teenagers who reminded him that success meant nothing without service to others who needed support and understanding. The healing that had begun with watching Marcus help a stranger in the lobby had blossomed into a complete reconnection with the deaf community. William's considerable wealth now funding scholarships, accessibility improvements, and advocacy programs that honored David's memory, while creating opportunities for countless others who deserved the same chances that privilege and circumstance had always provided to those born into easier circumstances. 2 years after his promotion had transformed him from struggling intern to corporate leader, Marcus Williams sat across from Jessica Rodriguez, a 19-year-old college student whose worn sneakers and carefully mended jacket triggered memories so vivid he could almost taste the instant coffee and feel the weight of unpaid bills that had once defined his existence. While her nervous energy reminded him of his own desperate hope during those early days, when opportunity seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. She was one of 15 new interns in his mentorship program, young people from backgrounds similar to his own, who understood that every day without pay was a day closer to impossible choices between dreams and survival, and Marcus had made it his personal mission to ensure that financial hardship would never again force someone to abandon their potential before the world had a chance to recognize their worth. His office had become a sanctuary for these emerging leaders, a place where honest conversations about struggle were met with practical solutions rather than empty sympathy, where students learned that their circumstances were temporary obstacles rather than permanent limitations, and where Marcus shared not just professional guidance, but the kind of emotional support that comes only from someone who has walked the same difficult path. The previous month had brought the joy of Emma's graduation from Riverside Academy, her valedictorian speech delivered in sign language to a standing ovation that left Marcus weeping with pride as he watched his sister, now 18 and headed to college on a full scholarship, demonstrate the confidence and brilliance that he had always known existed beneath the challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. His accessibility division had become the gold standard for corporate inclusion, with Fortune 500 companies regularly sending delegations to study their methods, while universities incorporated their training materials into business curricula and government agencies cited their work as proof that accessibility could be both morally imperative and financially beneficial. The conference circuit had embraced Marcus as a keynote speaker whose presentations drew standing room-only crowds, his talks combining personal narrative with practical strategies in ways that moved audiences to tears while inspiring concrete action in their own organizations, and each speech ended with the same message that had guided every decision since that transformative day in William's office. That true leadership meant using whatever power you gained to build bridges for those still searching for their way across the divide between where they were and where they belonged. As he looked at Jessica and saw himself reflected in her determined expression, Marcus understood that the greatest success of his career would not be measured in contracts or recognition, but in the number of young people who would never have to choose between survival and their dreams because someone had shown them that both were possible. 3 years after that fateful morning in the Pinnacle Enterprises lobby, Marcus Williams stood before a conference room filled with eager faces as he began the monthly sign language training session that had become one of the company's most popular professional development programs, his hands moving through the graceful gestures that spelled out "welcome," while his mind drifted to the impossible journey that had brought him from a struggling intern counting pennies to a respected leader whose influence had rippled far beyond the marble corridors where his story began. The David Harrison Accessibility Center occupied the entire 26th floor now, its state-of-the-art facilities serving as both a working laboratory for inclusive design and a memorial to the brother whose early death had taught William that love sometimes requires learning an entirely new language. And as William toured the center's latest innovations, he felt David's presence in every carefully considered detail that made the space welcoming to people of all abilities. The walls displayed photographs documenting the center's impact. Emma Williams accepting her college diploma, dozens of interns who had found their paths through Marcus's mentorship program, corporate executives from around the world studying Pinnacle's accessibility model, and deaf community members whose lives had been transformed by employment opportunities that valued their unique perspectives rather than seeing their differences as limitations. Sarah Mitchell's original consulting report had sparked a revolution that spread far beyond a single company, with federal accessibility standards now incorporating innovations pioneered at Pinnacle Enterprises, while Marcus's keynote speeches had inspired similar programs at hundreds of organizations, proving that inclusion was not just morally imperative, but competitively advantageous in ways that traditional business models had never imagined. As the training session concluded and employees filed out practicing their new signs with the enthusiasm of children learning a secret code, Marcus reflected on the profound truth that had emerged from one moment of simple human kindness: that the distance between stranger and friend, between struggle and success, between isolation and inclusion, could be bridged by anyone willing to extend their hand in genuine care for another person's dignity and worth. William appeared in the doorway, his expression carrying the peace that comes from using power in service of purpose rather than profit, and together they watched the sunset paint the city in golden light through windows that now looked out on a world where accessibility was becoming the norm rather than the exception. In boardrooms and break rooms, conference centers and community halls, the ripple effects of that Tuesday morning encounter continued to spread, proving that the smallest acts of humanity possess the power to transform not just individual lives but entire cultures, reminding everyone who witnessed their story that each of us carries within ourselves the capacity to change the world simply by choosing kindness when kindness is needed most, one gesture, one conversation, one moment of recognition at a time.